Oh dear. Hi, Charlene.
Hey.
I'm alive and kicking.
Sonal. Now we're live and now you can see us.
Hi.
Stop the data and all the nonsense that we were talking. We're all live now. And everybody's
Oh
listening.
dear. Okay.
I can see people are joining in because are we late? I think we are today, right?
Well, because of this storm, we didn't know.
Joining in when we're just waiting for a few of you and a few of our other friends to join in before I once again introduce the show to you. So
Charlie, are you trying to say we're not good enough? Are you trying to say we are not good enough for you?
We are good enough. You're better than good enough. Hi, Shalini. Good to have you here. It's lovely to see you again. Yes.
I can't see anything, but I'm waving.
Oh, great. Yeah, you can see that. I'll keep you all entertained with all the people that are joining in. And we're going to we're hiding our guest from you guys. We're keeping him backstage till we get started with a few people. Hi, Sakshi. Good to have you here.
Hi, Sakshi.
Girls. Okay.
Sakshi, you made it.
Let's get this show on the road. A very good evening to all of you for another episode of You, Me and Her. And I think we've got loyal audience now. There's Anjali Nair who's joined us as well. Hi, Anjali. We've been very lucky to have a lot of loyal audience, we're very grateful to all of you before we begin the show. This show is about topics which are real, topics which we all are going through, which are real experiences. Okay, and he started the drama and totally like making me lose the flow. I go, Didi's here as well. Welcome.
And a special guest appearance.
Okay, guys. So that is what this show is about. You, me, and her. And it's real. It's from home. It's about all of us. It's about your opinions, our perspectives, and interesting topics which everybody relates to. I want to say hello to Meeta, to Shruti, all the guests that are joining in. Today, I have a very interesting guest. There you go. We have a very interesting guest that's going to join us. I'm going to bring him into the studio and then introduce him. But before I do that, I do want to yet introduce my co-anchors because even though they're more famous than me, but nevertheless, I have Sonal Thakur here. Sonal, hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to You, Me, and Her.
Lovely.
So happy to have you.
You've been making us all dance to your tunes with all the drama you've done today, so you can just go ahead and introduce yourself now to people. You don't need me.
Oh God. So it's Syra and me.
Lovely. That too. She's always on the show and she's wearing a mask. We're following social distancing. We've got Ina that's joined us. Thanks, Ina, for joining us. There's Anuradha. Anuradha, hello. Welcome on the show.
Anuradha.
There you go. Okay, guys, I'm going to bring on my guest on the show because I think he's sitting backstage and getting too much tea and we're just watching him. So let's bring him on the show. Good evening to James. Hi, James.
Hello, good evening.
Lovely to have you.
Good to be here.
I was totally jealous with you having that cup of tea. I was like, oh my God, why am I online and he's having that cup of tea backstage? Good to have you here, James.
Great to have you here. I thought it was like an afternoon of coffee, so I made one for myself.
It is.
I can only see the top of. Can we see more of you? Sounds awful.
This
sounds awful.
This is it.
This is all you get. This is all you get.
Annie, how much more?
This is it.
Disclaimer.
This is my video conferencing level.
I'm worried. James is
just don't stand up in the middle of the show. We don't want to witness shots, etc. It's a very, very, very good performance. We're all dressed up. Well, cheers. So I want to introduce to everybody who's watching. Let's get real now. This is fun and games and all of that. But the idea is that we've got some very, very interesting, meaningful guests with us, and James is one of them. James was a senior partner at the Boston Consulting Group. Yay, yippee, I love Boston. So yeah,
I was.
And you were. I said he was. He's currently the founder and director of Solar Arise, which builds and operates large solar power plants. Am I right, James?
Yes.
Great, wonderful. And he is what I like about this whole story is because you're working a lot with teenagers, James. Is that right? Could you talk a little bit about that initiative of yours, because that is something which a lot of teenagers will be interested in listening to. So if you can just talk about that for us.
Yeah, very briefly. So over the last almost a decade now, I run a 2-week residential camp right against the river Ganges, just up near Shivpuri. And we get about 50 to 70 kids from all over India. These are teenagers ages 14 to 17. And we cover a lot of topics. But one of the things I love is I get to spend these 2 weeks with them away from home, away from their parents. And they get very real and they get into the topics that really matter to them. And they never get a chance to talk about these things with adults or with each other because they're always constrained at home or at school. Yeah. And so over the last decade, I've probably met over 500 of kids across India and across generations. And we've had really in-depth conversations about what life is going to be like for them.
Amazing. So I'm hoping that on the show, you will be able to share some of those insights that, and you have the insights. If you'll share that with us. I will not take away from Annie to introduce the topic, which is very interesting. Annie, why don't you do the needful in that?
Well, the needful. This is what I'm doing, the needful. No, because I've heard rumors that James here is also driving the social distancing and lockdown at his complex. So I can't risk it. I can't risk it.
Thank you.
No, but honestly, great to have you in, James. You're surrounded by 3 women. It's a fantasy for some. It could be a nightmare for anyone else, right? So it's all perspective.
Sure, it's all perspective.
No, but in all seriousness, actually, you've got lots of achievements aside. But the bit that really interests me is your position as chair, for the leadership program, for these young adults at the Ananda Aspen Center. Which means it gives you a lot of insight into the mind of the young adult, So that's what we're going to pick your brains on today. So don't get worried. It's all simple. It's all easy. Honestly, seriously, it is. And so this is why, the topic today, it's about the relevance of marriage in the modern world. And the reason why this has come about, because it really does, I think it floats around in Generation X, which is, I guess it's us, isn't it? And, and it's the way it's going. So lots of things keep me awake at night. For example, I've thought about the fact that, every generation has an Einstein, right? So in the time of the caveman, we had some genius, finding fire. And we had some other guy, probably his brother, saying, oh, let's cook with it. Then we had some Einstein later on saying, oh, forget the food. Let's go around it. Some caveman probably in Asia somewhere, not mentioning countries, of course. And of course, this is it. And so, yeah, bro, let's go around it. Let's seal the fate of 2 individuals, forevermore. And of course, we've added onto it generation after generation. And what really gets me, I don't see animals going around in robes with leaves and twigs, going around any rock or any pebble. Yet the human species love this pomp and show and love these kind of ceremonies. Why do we do them as humans? Seriously, come on, James, tell me. That's you.
That's a question for me.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So I didn't think this would be a history lesson, but so I'm not a historian.
I know you've got it.
I'm not a historian, but interestingly, this is one of the topics we end up discussing. So why do we have rituals? We have this discussion with the kids. And I'm glad you went back to the caveman days, because actually that's probably where it started. When people started to get together in groups and we had the agricultural revolution, there was this need to say, we need to stick together, right? And that came from one thing that separates humans from animals, and it's our ability to plan for the future. So we say, I'm willing to give something up today, like my freedom to go around and be with anybody, because I believe that in the future, somewhere there's some value or benefit that comes from it, right? And that's why we gather together, we give up some of our freedoms to create communities, to create villages, and so on. Somewhere along, and the first village and the first tribe was formed. In those tribes, frankly, the idea of the future, it didn't matter if you were married or not. There were there were women and men, and there were kids, and the kids were brought up by the community. There was nothing else. At some point, somebody decided to wake up and say, now I want to think about the future that goes beyond my death, my legacy. The problem with that is I don't know which one of these kids is mine, right? So that suddenly became a question, right? So I need to know which one is mine, because that's the only way I can think about legacy. And so you get this first idea of, okay, now then this woman must belong to me, because that's the only way I know that her children are my children. And that's how the idea of coupling came about, right? And then as societies grew, there was this idea that we need to now make this incredibly a solid contract, right? So, I want to live with you is a great line, but it's really not the basis for a long-term contract, right? So that's when religion stepped in and said, we need to make this really strong because society needs to be stable and it needs to flourish. So we have legacy and we have the society needing to flourish. And so they come out and say, let's add a third person into this contract, and that's God or gods or religion. Now, you can't simply have God write a contract. The best way to add God into any contract is to have incense and robes and flashes and, songs and dance and all of that, right? Because there is ceremony around faith and religion. That's, it's as old as everything else. And so then marriage became this entity where we have to add this third person to make it, what's the word? Have sanctity, right? The idea of sanctity, and right? That idea, right? It didn't exist when we first started, but it suddenly became critical. So now you have these three things that marriage gave you. It gave you an idea of looking to the future and having prosperity, looking to the future and having legacy, right? And so both those things brought these two things together. And of course, the idea that you need children, because at first it was just for labor, because the farm needs kids to work on. Oh, lights have gone. It'll come back. So you need kids for labor. But then you also need kids to carry on your legacy as well. So all these things, the fortune that you need to grow, you need legacy, and you need children for labor and prosperity. That's how this whole thing came about, and why you had ceremonies, actually.
Right. I mean, the way that I see it, though, you don't need to be married to have children. You can still do whatever you're doing without being signed, sealed, and delivered. Let's be honest. So if you look at the stats nowadays, if you look at American stats, 3.2 divorces out of 1,000. Even though in India, we still have the lowest divorce rate, you say maybe, I think, below or at least 1%, it still has doubled over the last 2 decades. We have the marriageable age, it's probably risen by a decade from 22 around about 30. And we have the increase of polyamorous relationships, where two people are saying, you know what, I don't mind if you go off with somebody else, I'm cool, right? So how relevant is all of this for youngsters today? Hasn't COVID taught us that we're going back to the basics? So in the same way, are we going back to the fact that we didn't really need it? We never had it. How relevant is it today for our youngsters, especially for millennials and maybe Generation Z or Gen Z?
Yeah, I think the generation. Yeah. So, sorry, Sonal, you were.
I'm going to jump in there for a bit, and because I disagree a little bit here with you, Annie. See, I do. Yeah. and I'm not getting in the middle of it. I'm going to come back, but I don't want to miss on that point. I do believe in the sanctity of marriage, as long as it's driven by choice and not a necessity. I think where we went wrong with our generation was it became a necessity that was governed by social norms, right? As long as two individuals come together with mutual love and acceptance and respect, I think there is a lot of value in this institution called marriage, because it does give you, your roots, your sense of belonging, a fundamental security that you look for. And, there is great value for it as far as the kids go, because, they have that foundation they're built for them through marriage, that marriage actually brings between two people. And you talked about polyamory. So my problem with polyamorous relationship or polyamory is that, it pays, so what we're saying is the supreme emotion that a relationship should be driven from is desires. Because because and also where do you draw a line between polyamorous and promiscuity, and what happens when the kids come into the picture, right? Where do you draw?
This is ongoing. This is a big topic. This really is a big topic. But right, it's this is it, isn't it? So James, I see. This is it. You need to get into the mind of that young adult. Now you've got that valuable information. So how relevant in their minds is the institution of marriage then?
So there's a lot of stuff the two of you have said. It's just I'm just amazed. You've talked about value, relevance, in sanctity, and the idea of polyamorous versus alternate forms of arrangement. I think we have to go back to when we grew up first. So whenever I sit down with these kids, I think back to what it was like for me and how completely different their world is than when we grew up. For us, our only models of married life were our parents and their society. And they got married because, it was the norm. All of their cousins and their friends and everybody else got married. We grew up, all of our friends got married, or most of our friends got married, and natural societal pressure said, of course, we should also get married. And we all got married. That was the only model we have. You go into somebody's head today, a 15, 16-year-old, they have so many other models in front of them. They do have happily married couples in front of them. That's a model that exists. They have happily divorced couples where the parents are extremely active in their lives, right? That's a live model. It's not like, I saw it on Modern Family. I'm saying that it's actually live in their lives today, right? They have single parents who have where multiple other adults are playing parental figures in their roles, right? So yes, it's one parent, but there are lots of other adults in their lives, and they're quite happy with it. They've got models of kids growing up with same-sex parents, right? So they look at all these models, and what I find fascinating, and in the years that I've been doing it, I've noticed a change from the first year I did it and last year when I did it. The comfort with which kids deal with this diversity of models, excuse me, in front of them, it's amazing. For them, it's natural, it's casual, it's easy. Of course, same-sex relationships. The Section 377, when it was abolished, the first year that I was there, when after that happened, what was that all about? Why did we even have it? To the next year, people were stunned that same-sex couples still cannot get married in India. Like that's they can't. They for them, it's as natural as anything else. It's as natural as anything else. That to me it's amazed me the ease with which they deal with diversity of models in front of them. So if I look at that, apply that to your question of relevance, I think all these models are relevant and all are valuable. So there will be lots of people who will be happily married, and they will choose to do this because they want to be happily married. I actually think, from one thing I've noticed in this polyamorous, I actually think there's going to be much greater monogamy in this next generation. But it may just be monogamy for the moment. By that I mean, they're happy to be married, but they're also okay to be divorced if it doesn't work out. There's nothing wrong in society. It's not just society. It's like the assumption in their heads. It's like they can't understand a conversation where divorce is bad. Like they can't understand that conversation. For us, we see it as taboo, right? There's still a taboo. It's not even there for them, right? So because it's so natural, it's very easy for them to have very committed relationships. Like we'd be surprised how committed their relationships are. But they know that it's there. And then there may be a moment when it's over, and that's also okay. And that'll go on. And then same-sex relationships, single parents, this is another thing. I think we will see more marriages where couples choose to be childless, and more single parents single people who choose to have kids, because both these are relevant models and both these are choices that they can easily make without any societal shame, question, anything. It's just a choice I choose to make. So you talked about relevance, value, identity. All three things exist. I just don't think it's an institution anymore.
So this is it. So what they're not doing, what you're saying is relating marriage to permanence like we did. So it's more fluid, is it? They're a bit more freer with it. Is that what you're saying?
No, I have to be careful, because for them, they like the happily married couple model, and they recognize that they don't get into this like, I'm only in this for this year. That's not the way they do it. They're in this for life, but they're okay if it doesn't work out, right? So they're also looking for permanence. They're also it's none of that has changed, but there's no institutional element around marriage.
Right.
It is it's good and important. It may be good and important for me, so I'm going to go after this. It may be good and important for you, and you can go after it, and we can be best friends forever.
Okay.
There's nothing unnatural.
James, one thing that you brought up is, the next generation, they have a lot of choices, right? I think we as parents have given them enough space to actually make the choices that they want. My worry is that, like you just talked about, somebody choosing to be a single parent, right? Well, it may be an accepted form, and maybe with generations of balancing, it will come. How about the kid? How are we actually talking about the progeny? What happens to them? Isn't that a bit unfair for a kid to be born with single parent, not even having a choice of having mom or a dad together, or even same-sex couples for that matter, but at least having two people in their lives? Aren't we taking their choice away from the kids?
Yeah, I think, again, I think it has to do with the way we ended up growing up. I think maybe our parents and maybe our grandparents' generation grew up in groups, in extended families, right? Like they were cousins and everybody lived together. So the children had multiple parental role models, right? We were the ones who became nuclear. And so our kids, I was very lucky to grow up here in this community because my kids had actually multiple parental models. They call some of their friends' parents, oh, that's my other dad, and that's my other mom. And they do this with ease. They were lucky, but they're rare. Like and probably your kids too, they're probably rare. We became nuclear. As soon as we became nuclear, it became impossible. It became incumbent on both people to provide those two role models. It's kind of unfair, actually, to put that pressure on both the mom and the dad to be like the sole adult models for them, right? What's interesting about this group is they're going back to the village model. So I'm seeing the depth of relationship that surprises me at this age that I did not see in myself when I was a teenager growing up. And I can see these things lasting years. I'm seeing people who go off to university, come back, but boy, their teenage relationships are as deep as they were when they left, and they haven't seen each other for years in between. Social media is actually a fantastic tool that's helped them maintain those relationships. Yeah. But those relationships they're actually literally in each other's lives. And I don't know what it'll be like when they have kids, but my guess is the kids are going to have multiple role models. And now I use that in today's example because today I've seen there are kids who have single parents, but actually they have multiple parental adult models in their lives. So actually they're not missing the mom-dad thing that we think we're missing. We have this in our heads. It's our model, and we impose that model on somebody else and think, oh, aren't you missing this? And in truth, they'll tell you, well, I've got this uncle who does this and this person who does this, and they'll give you this full list, and it's quite amazing. They're actually got a richer gamut of relationships, of adult relationships that are models for them than we could imagine. We have been a little unlucky.
Right.
But here
so James, I think I'm going to bring you to
Shals.
Should I? Okay. So James, I think I'm going to bring you to the current circumstances because we're all locked down at home with our families, right? So there was a lot of children who would stand their ground and say that they don't believe in the concept of marriage. They wanted to go overseas to study. There was a whole lot of thought processes. But I believe that, a lot of things have changed in these 2 months. And I can see a lot of children, a lot of clients that I'm interacting with thinking differently because we're going back to the basics of living together and families have become important. Do you think that this lockdown for this amount of time has changed mindsets of teenagers, of youngsters, of young adults?
It's interesting. I continue to have conversations with these kids over years because luckily I get invited to all their chat groups, which is fascinating. I'm finding it's the inside. I'm not allowed to reveal anything. Code of confidentiality. Hand on. But I do think, Shalini, you're making
share it with us.
Yeah, only you and your millions of audience. Yeah. So you are right. I think that the advantage is not the right word. One of the benefits of this time being locked down is everybody's valuing family more than they did before. And it's interesting because when the kids went away, they were kids. Now they're coming back as adults. So the relationship between them and between us and our kids have to change as well, right? We have to treat them like adults. So the advantage of this lockdown is we're changing the nature of that relationship from kid parent to, adult parent. Like, having adult children is a very odd dynamic, right? I think that is true. And so they're valuing family even more. However, that doesn't change anything else. It's like, yes, I value family. I love being around, but it's okay if the family is just me and a bunch of my friends. It's okay if it's me and a husband or me and a wife. It's okay if it's same sex. All those models still exist. What's beautiful is, you're right, they just value it more.
Okay. Right. So this is it. Yes, Sonal, you were saying.
I was actually James. You mentioned that I agree. Kids are more and more bonding with their paternal maternal sides, and it's almost like a community build up. But here the assumption when we talk about single parenting, the assumption that we are making is that the joint family or the community bringing up exists. We are still, a lot of us are still nuclear. So from that nuclear, if you went single, right, aren't we taking away from them rather than bringing it back? Because the underlying assumption cannot be that the community already exists for them to look up to with single parenting, right? So that's a
Yeah, that is true. I think the it's also the distance between us and our kids. So there's actually at least one, if not two generations between us. So the kids that I talk to and the kids, my age kids as well, versus where I am, there's a 30-something and a 20-something before you get there, right? And you're already seeing this change happening in those successive generations. By the time we're talking about the high school kids that I talked about growing up, having kids, creating families, we're a decade and a half away. Yeah, it's not going to happen next year. That amount of time is enough for some of this evolution to happen, and the generations in front of them are already making this happen. And I don't know if we see it as much. I see it in other communities that this late 20s, early 30s generation, that generation in India is already shifting and changing. They're the ones who grew up in the 2000s and 2010s, right? That generation is already shifted. They don't have the baggage that we come in with, right? And they're laying the groundwork for this next generation coming in. So the community, you're right. We cannot just say, okay, go for it, and then there's nothing there for them, right? I think the communities are getting built. And they are, some of them may be global, but you're also seeing local communities getting built. And our kids have actually a really strong identity of what community means. So one other thing, when I take these kids away they're together for 14 days, and they have no access to parents or anything else. They talk to their parents for an hour a day, no access to any phones, nothing during the end. So they're really with each other. In the first 3-4 days, it's very awkward because they're from all walks of life, right? So they're from the metros to the villages. There are kids who, for summer vacation, they're in Switzerland, and others in summer vacation, they're working the farm. First time they've ever been on a flight, first time they've ever been out anywhere. So we've got the whole gamut. It takes a week. After a week, they actually form a community. We have people who rely and depend on each other who never would have met otherwise, who today are still really good friends and still share, their intimate secrets to be able to rely on each other. So their ability to form community, it's amazing. And they've learned this skill and they know how to pull this off. Better than I think it took us time. It takes us months, years to do it. They can do it quickly.
James, I have to say, you mentioned social media and you mentioned the impact. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second because I think we're very intrigued by all that he's saying, but we do have audience that is curious. So we want to address their questions in the middle as well. Harjeet here is asking us, can you ask him the disadvantages of today's crisis as well? A lot of kids are getting abused in the lockdown period. Also, the impact of too much proximity on spouses. And I think this is a very important question. So if you could address it for Harjeet before Annie leads you to the next one.
Oh, what a fantastic question. I think we talked about all the different models these kids have today about, happily married, happily divorced, unhappy married. So they've got all the models around them. So what Harjeet is saying is exactly right. When we're all locked up together, all the good and bad of those models come right up, right? Come right to the fore. So you see the value of having a happily married home, but it's like you're in a crucible. So in an unhappily married home, like you can fake it for a while, but it comes right to the top.
Yeah.
So these kids are seeing the goods and bads of all these models, very real, and it's on all the chat groups, right? They're talking to each other. It's very, very real. So they're making all the value judgments they had are getting reaffirmed. The specific point about the fact that there are some kids who are getting it because being at home, safe at home, it's a luxury for some people, right? So there are kids for whom home is a violent, destructive place. And we had kids like that who came to camp, kids who would cut themselves, kids who would, did not want to go back home, who would cry on the last day, said, I just don't want to go. And I'd have these, horrible stories to deal with. But That is true. It is very real. I wish we could say we could easily go and take them out and rescue them, but that's very difficult. I know that some of those kids over time have grown up, gone to college, moved away from home, and are actually thriving now, and they still stay in touch. They're really amazing.
Right, Charlie, any questions? They're more important than me.
Yes.
So any other kind of
so I think,
questions?
So as they're coming, I'll keep addressing them. Ani, you go on ahead with your question now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I just want to go back to the point where you said, James, where social media has really bonded children together because they're in contact more. But I think from what I can see, that social media is really responsible for, I think, maybe the breakdown of the idea of what we used to see as marriage and the permanence and, and death to us, until us part or whatever. Because they almost want to show perfection. Everything is perfect. The photos are perfect. The relationships are perfect. So it's a lot of stress on somebody to think, well, is this what I need to be in a relationship? Is this what it's supposed to be like? I mean, isn't that responsible for a lot of people probably shying away from this idea of, I guess, contributing to the different model of marriage that we see nowadays?
I think you maybe, I can see that connect, but I did not. So I can only reflect what I've talked to kids about over the last, several years. This never came up. This issue, this was never, ever a point. I want to make a couple of distinctions on social media. There's public social media where there's a presence, and so it's publicly available, it's broadcast. And in that case, yes, what you've described is exactly what happens. There's a show, it's photoshopped, it's happy marriages, all that kind of stuff, right? Kids don't believe that. For them, it's like they're smart enough to decipher reality versus that. And then there's also private social media where there are close groups where people share more of their intimacy, but it's only with a very small group. That's actually where most of our kids are actually spending their time. They're not spending their time in public social media. It never actually, you would hear a couple of things here and there, cyberbullying and a couple of things that would come up. But frankly, interestingly, things like cyberbullying were rare. It was like an odd situation. Violence at home was common, but cyberbullying was very, very odd. So I just distinguish between private and public use of social media.
Okay,
I have a question.
No, okay, Sonal.
Charlie, do we have any? Go ahead.
No, Sonal, go ahead. You go ahead, because we shouldn't run out of time. So go ahead with your question, then we can have a little closing statement. Go ahead.
I have a very basic question where we started with, what in between all of these choices and norms and so many open relationships, what happens to love? The old kind of romantic love with honesty and commitment and a sense of belonging and loyalty. It meant so much while we were growing up, right? We grew up like that, and I
what's marriage got to do with it, though? Why do we need to be signed, sealed, and delivered for that love to be, to be shown or to be felt? Why do we need marriage? Why do we need the signature on a piece of paper? That's my thing.
Okay, so if we are not married, I agree. It's a choice, right? But tell me something. What is stopping the young generation to be in a relationship and then walk away when the desires are not met, or when they feel that they're no longer attracted to the other person? What happens to that maybe between they have a kid, and there it is, there is a single mom with a kid in an open marriage, or not an open marriage.
Open marriage, all right. That's another conversation.
It's easier.
James, are you confused completely now?
Yeah, I'm now.
It's much easier for a guy to walk out, when there is no institution of marriage than a woman. What happens to the kid? And we will have so many single parents, not as a choice, but as
So this is okay. Again, I'm going to reflect what I hear from the kids. First is, I think just because they have all these models in their mind doesn't mean that they don't value love and that they don't value commitment. In fact, they are so committed to, I mean, I can only judge their friendships and I can see how they're growing up and I can see what they're like later in life because I hear their stories back. Love, commitment, it's still 100% up there. By the way, the institution of marriage started to die with love, just so we understand where the institution of marriage was first established, right? Because it was first established for society, and society doesn't need love. You just need you to be together for life.
Yeah,
and
true.
have kids. That's what society did, right? And by the way, it's the society gets to choose who you marry. It's not, love doesn't have anything to do with this, right? So stability and progress as an institution, right? So as an institution, it existed for a different reason. Love started to erode. The second thing that eroded, by the way, was the voting right for women. So as soon as women got the voting right, you had two equal parties in this relationship. And so now both parties got to make a choice. And as soon as both parties get to make this choice, marriage is no longer an institution in the sense that we need it for society. It's actually something else. It's actually something I value because in and of itself, I make a choice because it's valuable to me. So as an institution, it may be over. Now, love, commitment, it is as deep as it is anywhere else. You will see that in this. And by the way, the other thing I'll say is these kids are not fickle. They're not like, oh, it's not working out today, I'll go. I know that we sometimes see that and we think that about our kids, but they're teenagers after all, and we have to forgive them. We were just as, I think we were worse, to be honest. When I look at what they're like,
I was perfect.
Well, of course you were. Annie D was always perfect. I know that story. Yes. So I think they'll
this will be a really fun discussion. We've been going over for 40 minutes and we can go on forever. So if you have some last message to give the audience, James, that will be really special. Something meaningful, please.
Yes. So I have, so last thing I'll say is we have to get out of the own models in our head and stop judging our kids and societies with our lenses. So what we think is good for us. It's not necessarily the model that's perfect for others. I had the same problem with my parents. I married somebody outside my religion. It took me 9 years to actually get to the wedding time. And it was the same struggle. They had to get over their heads that there's only one model that's right. And that's the same thing that we have to do now for our kids.
Wonderful. Awesome. Annie, Sonal, what would you like to say?
Well, I just say bring in the beta marriage. The beta marriage. In a contract. You can decide 2 years, 10 years, renegotiate. I think it's perfect.
I think
we have Anuradha saying that it's a great session, and we have a lot of other people appreciating this as well. And what I want to say is that, there will always be different perspectives, and every show, when we end it, we've come to the same conclusion that we should all have the freedom of choice. And considering all the circumstance we're all in, we have to stay positive, we have to stay connected, keep the communication going with your spouses, with your children, and nothing can go wrong. And James, it's great to have you. I just want to tell you that this is not the last time, because you have so many insights that 40 minutes is simply not enough. So we would love to have you back on our show again. And Sonal and Annie, as usual, you girls have to keep the conversation going while I keep the audience entertained. Great to be here. Thank you for watching.
Right, thanks, James. Bye, people.
Thank you.
Me and her. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
See you guys. Until next time.
Bye.